Welcome to Living Outside the Matrix, the philosophy show where we explode the many modern myths of our culture and examine important and helpful issues that affect our lifestyle choices. My name's Nigel Howitt, and on the show today we're going to take a look at emotional freedom technique, or EFT for short. Sometimes just known simply as tapping, it was created by Gary Craig in the late 90s, and it's rapidly become a very popular and effective tool for addressing personal fears, perhaps irrational fears of spiders, of flying, things like that, or of changing habits. If you want to sleep better, if you want to change your eating habits, if you want to try and learn to still your mind more for relaxation, these are all things that can be addressed using EFT. It's essentially a combination of tapping various energy meridians on various points of the body, the collarbone and various points, as we shall see later in the interview, and combining that with either being guided by a practitioner or self-guiding oneself with well-chosen words that can help us overwrite the subconscious programs written deep within our minds that can be the unconscious motivating factors for our behaviour. So just recently I interviewed Corah Clark. She's an EFT practitioner from Sundridge in Kent, and she shared with us her experience of EFT. Corah, thank you so much for taking the time to join us today, and a very warm welcome to the show.
Thank you, good to be here.
I understand, Corah, that you're a psychotherapist before you came into an understanding of EFT. Is that correct?
Yes, for quite a while. I qualified, I started my training in 1993 and qualified in 97, I think. And it was mainly talk therapy. It was very effective. But when I discovered EFT, it sort of put rocket boosters on my practice. I think it changed everything.
Yes, a lot of people have reported that EFT does significantly enhance talk therapy. So how did you come across it? What was your route into tapping or EFT?
I mean, goodness, I was doing so many different, because I'm a member of the British Association for Counselling and Psychotherapy, the BACP, and part of that you have to have continual professional development. So, and because I love this sort of work, I'm always looking into new ways of working, new practices. There are so many developments, and we know so much more about the brain and how it works and its sort of relevance to the psychological and physiological self. So I heard about thought field therapy first, which is the precursor to emotional freedom technique, EFT. And I was fascinated by it, went on a workshop, met the founder sort of on a link on the phone, and found it fascinating. Couldn't quite understand what it was about, so went away and learned a bit more. Had a bit of a gap, and then found EFT and Matrix Reimprinting, which is sort of a development on from EFT as well.
So can you elaborate on that, Matrix Reimprinting? Is it some kind of mental reprogramming?
Well, yes, to a degree. I think what's important to understand is the way EFT and Matrix now and a whole host of other modalities work is to look at the unconscious mind and the subconscious mind, because 95% of our attitudes, beliefs, memories, behaviours are rooted in that soil. The conscious mind is very creative, and it's, if we can get a balance between the two, great. So Matrix Reimprinting will, if you like, the unconscious doesn't know time, put it this way. It doesn't know past, present, future. If something triggers us in the now, it will take us right back to the genesis of where a belief or a pattern had been first formed. What Matrix does is it talks about echoes, energy, consciousness, holograms. It doesn't really matter what they are. It's a metaphor for the unconscious way of holding traumas from the past in our memories. And we can work with Matrix, which is basically EFT with time travel. We just sort of go back to those unconscious memories and we tap on the echo. We tap on that younger self. It's it's the language of the unconscious. It's dreams, it's metaphor, it's body sensation, it's all of those, and it works very, very effectively to release the belief pattern.
Sure, it makes perfect sense, doesn't it? That through our experience from from the dawn of our lives as babies, through our upbringing, that various experiences, potentially perhaps traumatic experiences, or indeed wonderful experiences, are going to be all recorded there somewhere in our subconscious. Perhaps first we should look at what is tapping. Can you show us some of the points that you use in your practice, and then maybe we'll go on to that question of how.
Of course. And the thing is about tapping is it does look ridiculous. And when I'm working with clients, I do have to sort of build up a little bit of a scientific background to it before I expect them to start tapping on specific points on their face. It's not fair on the client or individual to expect them to do things that they're not getting a sense of.
And so, how do you do that? Sorry to interject, but how do you? What is your approach at sort of scientifically engaging them, if you like, through some kind of scientific explanation?
Well, I start by saying that they're not broken. When a client comes to me, often they've been told that they're wrong, they're broken, something bad about them. I believe that whatever's going on, it's a construct trying to keep them safe. So if somebody comes in with anxiety or depression, there's a reason for that. The psyche doesn't make mistakes. There's an adequate reason. Our job, I say to clients, I don't know what's best for you, but I do know your unconscious mind does, and I'm a good detective. So we work together. And so this sort of languaging starts to get a sense of a relationship, a sense of trust, a sense that we're both working together, and that person knows themselves better than anyone knows them. So I'm not about to go in and rummage around and release things that perhaps need to be there, So if you like, the unconscious patterns, if something happens in the past and the child, because children are very easily traumatized. We're not talking about traumas as in big car accidents and things like that. A trauma essentially is when we can't run and we can't fight. We're usually on our own and we go into a freeze. That's the third survival strategy that we have. So that freeze, and there are all sorts of ways of describing this, and some people say that, it's blocked energy, or it doesn't really matter. There is a scientifically proven aspect to us that if we cannot get away, in a way, part of us can dissociate. If there's something happening to us in rape cases, things like that, often clients will flee in their mind to keep away. So there are all sorts of ways that people cope, and I think coping mechanisms have to be respected before they're changed or fiddled with in any way. So if a client is coming in with anxiety, it's important to understand that anxiety is trying to keep them safe. The unconscious is always trying to keep us safe. It's just, it doesn't know time has passed. It doesn't know that the threat has gone. And our system, whether it's a threat from a deadline, a relationship going wrong, whatever, we have one system, one fight or flight stress system we work with. And that's where I think tapping has a great advantage, because, I work with soldiers with post-traumatic stress disorder or little 8-year-old girls with a fear of dogs. It doesn't matter what it is. The system is reacting, trying to keep that individual safe. And it gets, if you like, into a closed loop feedback system. So if you think a thought, you're going to feel something in the body. The mind-body relationship is well proven now through, kinesiology is something that works with muscle testing, sees the resistance when we're having a conflicted thought. So if we can interrupt the feedback, if you like, so your mind is saying, okay, there's a threat, we're anxious, we've got the amygdala going off like a smoke alarm, there's something we're trying to sort of anticipate. Being hypervigilant, which a lot of anxiety is about, is trying to anticipate where that threat is going to come from. So that could be a past issue where a child grew up in an unstable environment, sudden things happened. So their belief system would have been, right, sudden things happen. I've got to be ready for those. So people can grow, with this anxiety can be something that can be a lifelong thing. So when the brain is doing that, there's a whole, you've heard of the HPA axis, which sets off the whole adrenal system, the hypothalamus amygdala adrenal reaction in the body. So adrenaline, cortisol, everything's getting ready. The mind is saying, right, look out, look out. Body's saying, yeah, we're ready to run or fight. We're breathing in our upper chest. So we're continually telling the body there's a threat. So that's how a lot of clients come to me. And even if they're acting calm and they look like they're in control, underneath, they've got this going on.
Okay, so just to recap, so I understand, and the listeners, it's a sort of habitual state of stress or a chronic state of stress that's possibly unresolved from potentially some past experiences. Is that fair to say?
Often, because the thing is, the body is constantly trying to process unprocessed experiences. And when I say unprocessed, I mean, if you remember something from the past and you can still get angry about it, or you can still blush, or you have a physiological reaction to it, there's almost like a charge to that memory. So the way I describe to clients, it's when something triggers us in the now that makes us feel in this state, whatever that state might be. It's almost like, and I like to use metaphors because it works very well with the unconscious, it's almost like tuning in a radio station to that frequency of that state. Because we know the different frequency of joy compared to the frequency of anger or sadness. It feels very, very different in the body. So if something makes us feel a certain way, our unconscious will go, oh, I remember this feeling, and it will go to whatever that is. This comes flooding in, and then people go, oh, Nigel's overreacting. And it's not just this stimulus that they're reacting to all of this coming back into awareness. So the unconscious isn't doing that to punish us and make us feel bad. It's doing that to say, oh, right, can we process this now? Can we let this go now? So it's into our awareness. Then our conscious mind goes, I don't like how this makes me feel, and depresses it, just pushes it somewhere. Depression is often that feeling of like just pushing it down, or there might be some behavioral avoidance like gambling or drinking or something that takes us away from that feeling.
So you've engaged your client or the person that's approaching you for tapping therapy, and you sat them down. You've got this relationship. Everyone's comfortable because it does look kind of strange. Maybe you can show us the main tapping points, and also, are the tapping points common to all practitioners? Once you're a registered practitioner, as I know you are, does everyone sign up to the same tapping points?
Well, yes, because they do relate to what they call the meridians in the body. Now, again, some people go, oh, well, that's not proven. I mean, fine. However, they are starting to map them in Western science. The meridians I describe to people like the optic fibers in the body. We're electromagnetic beings. We have a way of organizing that around the body and communicating very swiftly. It's like sending light or an energy or information around the body quickly, and it's organized into a system. The meridian lines, we have the end points, which is what was first discovered, seem to have this direct, immediate effect relating to calming that part in the brain, the amygdala, this circuit breaker, if you like, of the mind-body connection. If the body is saying, oh, we're getting ready to run or fight, and if with the tapping on specific points, it sends a feedback of calm to the mind or the brain, then the brain will say, oh, the threat must have passed, and the amygdala response just starts to relax down. So the specific points are, there's the inner eyebrow, so bladder, gallbladder, stomach, central meridian, which goes all the way down to the base of the spine, a governing meridian down the front, and then you've got the collarbone here about 2 inches down is the kidney meridian. In Chinese medicine, the kidneys hold fear. And it's interesting, this point, because when we're tapping it, it's quite comforting. If you imagine, if you walk into a road and a car comes along, you might go, we know that makes us feel better. We sort of just forgot why. These things are not new. They are there. We just have lost a lot of our connection. To separate the mind and body, I think, robs us of our full humanity, really. So the tapping, yes, it is consistent, and you have the top of the head, which people do with the junction. You can also do here, which is the spleen, but often that's a bit sort of weird for people, so sometimes I leave that out. And there's also under here, the chest, which again, if I'm tapping on someone, I don't usually tap on them, I get them to tap themselves. But doing that is a bit awkward. That's the liver, so that's normally left out. But those are the main ones. So you'd be tapping here and sort of, your own pace. And you could do this, could do that. And you're in the emotion, you're in the feedback loop, and this is the circuit breaker.
That concurs with my scant knowledge of tapping. I have tried it, as I've said to you previously, and found it to work. So this is why I'm so fascinated about it. So you've shown us the tapping points. Now I further understand that at the beginning of a session, we start by sort of calling to mind an issue, and then we go through a process of self-acceptance. I like to think of it as a sort of a ground zero, accepting things as they are, to sort of create a starting point. Do you want to walk us through that?
Yes, and I'm glad you brought this up, because I think it's a really important part of it. If we're in the middle of an anxiety phobic response or something, this part can be left out. We can just go straight to letting it go, processing it out. But if we're trying to really gather ourselves and, as you say, start at ground zero, it's really important to get this sense of accepting how we feel, because we're so used to pushing that feeling away. And if we keep pushing that feeling away or judging it, often people will say, oh, God, I'm so stupid, or this or that. That's essentially, that languaging is very, very powerful in the psyche, and it effectively pushes us away. And I do, with clients, I don't know if you saw the film Inside Out with the different characters in the head. I don't know if you saw that. Well, I brought this little chap along because this demonstrates, he in the film represented fear. But it could be whatever it is that we don't want to look at, we push away. We judge ourselves so harshly half the time. It's the thing we don't want to recognize. But the thing is, as long as we keep pushing it away, it's going to keep popping up. It's going to keep saying, look at me, I still hurt. Look at me. I'm going to turn up in another pair of shoes until you look at me and deal with this and process this. So I say to people, and this is in the session often, that if that was a younger you, holding a trauma or something from the past in a memory, you as adult you, if you saw that little child sitting there at the edge of a pavement, you wouldn't push them under a bus. You wouldn't laugh at them or ignore them. You might just sit down next to them and say, do you mind if I sit here? Do you want to talk? No. You just be with that part. And this is about the acceptance. Because often when people are asked to accept themselves, they can't do that. They're in a state. So I use this as a metaphor. So eventually you can get to that part, bring it in and say, I love you so much. Because when we bring in those metaphorical echoes, whatever we want to call them, those memories of the past, then we can change them, then we can work with them.
So you're effectively, we must block the suppression of things. We must let it all come to the surface in order to deal with it, I suppose. So that's really the purpose of this. I love and accept myself exactly as I am. In spite of the fact that I do whatever it is that you're working on, or if you're trying to stop smoking or lose weight,
exactly.
or whatever it is.
Yeah, because in Jungian terms, Carl Jung, it was called embracing the shadow. It was bringing in the shadow to individuate, to be whole, to be a person that doesn't have all of their energy out there or blaming everybody and not having that central power.
Yep.
In shamanic terms, it's soul retrieval. It comes into all sorts of different sciences.
Absolutely. It strikes me as being completely rational and sensible that in order to deal with a problem, you have to acknowledge it, because that's step one, isn't it? You're not going to solve anything while you're in denial about the fact that it's happening.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So this is a kind way of doing it. And how that translates into EFT is that we tap, on this point. It's either side. We call it the karate chop point. It's actually the small intestines. And this also, I think EFT, I think it works on so many different levels, because as we're tapping, it keeps us in the here and now. So if we're accessing memories, and the unconscious can very quickly go into a memory and think that it's all happening again, it also has to process this new information, this tapping. Right. Because when we're in the past, we're in a trance. When we're in the future, we're in a trance, because we're recreating the sights, the scenes, the players, the stage, the script in our minds. The only time we're not in a trance is in the here and now.
Okay, so it's the actual physical doing of something, and the perception of the tapping that sort of anchors us in the here and now reality of what's going on.
I think it works on many different levels, and I think that's definitely one of them. I think there is also, it's the piezoelectric effect, they call it. This kinesthetic tap is translated into an electrical impulse in the body. So there's that going on, and it seems to connect to this access and calms the amygdala response down. Mm-hmm. And it also works, I believe, on an energetic level. When it was first brought in, Roger Callahan and Gary Craig, who then developed thought field therapy into emotional freedom techniques, they both came from the idea, which I think is still valid, of blocks in the energy field, blocks in the body, in this system. And Roger Callahan used to talk about them as being perturbations in the field. So you can imagine these sort of, like, if we're in a state and you've got the wave function really sort of jagged, this strong impulse almost overrides it and just calms it down out of the system. So I think on that level too, the fact is nobody 100% with any real surety knows exactly how it works. And that's why I love it too. I love a bit of a mystery, because I've worked with thousands of people now. I know it works. It's worked on me hugely.
Guide us through how you'll do it. We've calmed the client. We've created this sort of baseline of self-acceptance, and then can you give us an example issue of how you might, how long does it take? And obviously you're cycling through these tapping points as you mentioned. Can you give us a feel for a tapping session?
Okay, so I've explained how it works to them. They're seated. And if they've got something going on in the here and now, then we'll go straight in.
Yeah. And
we could say the setup phrase, the whole part of this acceptance part it's like a sandwich of words. So it starts with an even though, and then it ends with a I love and accept myself anyway. So whatever's in the middle of that sandwich is the thing that they're working with. Or it's the thought, or it's the compulsion, or whatever it is. It could be a body symptom. So even though I've got this headache, even though I know I'm going to fail that exam, even though I've got this presentation coming on and I'm really scared, I can love and accept myself anyway. Now, the thing about that is it's important for the client to know that, and that's why sometimes this little character is great, is that it's not the whole of them that feels that way. It's a part of them, and that part relates to perhaps something that happened in the past. So it's even though, this part of me is really scared of the presentation or thinks they're really stupid or they're not going to do and everyone's better than them and all of those thoughts from the past, it's a part because we are bigger than our stories. Whatever our stories are, and I hear some horrendous stories in my work, I know that person is sitting there. And I know that there's a part of them in their mind, in their way of being that is bigger than that story. And that's the one that is accepting. So even though I'm feeling, and that I is the small I can love and accept that part of me anyway. So that's the sort of feeling of it, because if people associate too strongly with whatever it is that's going on, they can feel very, very lost and hopeless. But if they know there's a part of them that's standing on the riverbank and is throwing the line out to that one in the raging river, then they start building a sense of, resources, resilience, all of those things. So I'm very careful the way I draw people through, because they have to sort of be with me every step at this stage. And it's not a question of a belief system, because I think that's a step too far for people too. It has to make sense.
So what do you mean by that? Do you mean that the EFT is not establishing a belief system, or do you mean that the issue that they have is not a belief system? Just to clarify.
The EFT, they don't have to believe in it to work.
Sure, okay.
But you know what I mean? For it to work. But it's important that they have an understanding of it. Absolutely. Because it's
like using electricity and flicking on a light. You know, you don't have to know how it works.
Yeah, exactly. Great example. So they'll be sitting there, and if on the other hand I've got a client, and oftentimes I do, who comes in and this is a first session and they're nervous, and appropriately so, you know, it's a weird thing to go to a session. They don't know me. They don't know what's expected of me. I'm very quick to say that there's no judgment or expectation of them, you know, and this is their safe place. Because unless there's a level of safety built into the practice, people will not, that their unconscious will not let them go anywhere. They don't feel safe. So that's what's really important, because the other thing I say to people that in the wild, because animals don't tend to get traumatized, you know, because they process as they go along. So an antelope running away from a tiger, it's in fight or flight, it's running for its life. And just before it's caught, it might go into that freeze response, that third strategy, because the tiger might just let it go. If it's let go of, it's off and running. And the important thing is it gets to a safe place, and then it starts to shake all the adrenaline, cortisol, everything out of its system. And then it goes back to eating grass. It's not eating grass going, blinking, nor are there lions and tigers here. You know, it's just eating grass. You know, or you watch deer in a park. About, I don't know how many hundreds of times a day, they're going, what's that? What's that smell? What's this? You know, they're in that freeze, ready. And all of that energy that would have gone into fight or flight implodes into the central nervous system. And it's there waiting to be processed out. So what deer do, and if you watch them in a park, there's this little tremor that starts at the back of their ears, and it goes all the way down through their bodies, out through their hind legs. And they do that through the day. They're processing. We humans, domestic pets, zoo animals, you know, we don't shake it off. If somebody's shaking after an accident, we tell them, oh, have a cup of tea, stop shaking, please, because you're making me nervous. You know, that we stop that response. So we've got this build up. So with a client coming in who's feeling nervous, I might just say, okay, you know, I've explained the EFT, start tapping here, because that starts getting them connected to their body. The unconscious is processing this information. It's quite a relaxing thing to do anyway. And I might just say to them, look, just scan your body like a radar or an MRI scan from the top of your head all the way down through your body. No expectation, just notice what you notice. Notice any tension, notice where your attention goes to. And it's just setting up. So they just get a bit of time, because we don't listen to our bodies much. We wait for things to turn up as a symptom, you know, a slap in the face, when there are always these little whispers of information held in the body, unprocessed things. So if we spend the time doing that, then you'll get somebody saying, oh, actually, I feel a knot in my stomach, or I feel a weight on my chest, or I feel a fuzziness in my head. All these metaphors. So you know you're sort of dealing with the unconscious there. They don't have to know what it is even. They just need to know how it makes them feel. And it's that felt sense that we know we're in the central nervous system. And that's where this perturbation, or whatever we want to call it, is, that's wanting to be released. Does that make sense? Is there sort of...
Absolutely. So I've also heard people like Nick Ortner talking about putting their level of trauma or their issue on a scale of 1 to 10, and sort of tuning in to that, if you like. And then are you cycling through the tapping points in the process? And what other things are you saying? What other aspects are there to the process?
Okay, so once we've done this, even though I'm feeling this, I love and accept, we'll say that about 3 times. Mm-hmm. And then we'd start just tapping here very gently. It can be either side or both, you know, and just focusing in on whatever that is. So, you know, this knot in my stomach. And you might repeat it a few times to really focus on it. And then the outer eye, just tapping gently in the outer eye. This knot in my stomach. It's okay to let it soften. I might start introducing an instruction then, or it might be worth using their language. If they've said things in the session, I will note how they've described that knot. Is it to unravel? I try and get information about this metaphor using a thing called clean language. So if somebody's talking about a knot, I might ask, so how big is that knot? Where exactly is that knot? What's it made of? How old is it? Does it have a colour? Does it have a texture? So the more information you get on it, it's remarkable how then it starts just changing in its quality. And the whole process is about letting it go. It's about processing. It's the equivalent of the shaking it out.
It's more so, do you think, that the actual physical activity rather than the words spoken, do you think that's actually achieving that processing as you refer to it?
It's interesting because I come from talk therapy, and I've done a lot of just talking without the tapping. And I've noticed the complete difference when it comes to incorporating the tapping and focusing on whatever it is that seems to be making the biggest difference. So the focusing in, the tapping. So when people, as I say, when they're thinking a thought and they're feeling it in the body, and there's usually a little sort of stress response going on in the brain, if there is, as they're conjuring up this memory and they're feeling that stress or trauma becoming activated, this is at the same time keeping them in the here and now and calming down the stress response at the same time. Mm-hmm. So it's like it's coming up and going out.
I've heard it said that it's the tapping in some way sends a signal directly to the amygdala, this part of our sort of ancient brain, if you like, that's supposedly, allegedly, I'm not an expert, so I'm just repeating what I heard, the part of the brain that deals with the stress, the fight or flight process,
exactly.
Fight or flight response.
Yeah.
So the tapping's actually, in having some effect.
Oh, definitely. And they've proven this. They've had people. I mean, there's so much research on this now, you can imagine. I mean, there really is. You could spend weeks reading it. So they have, I can't remember when it was. It would be worth finding. People that were hooked up to an EEG monitor, you could see the brain activity on the screen in live time. And somebody perhaps with arachnophobia, showing them a spider, and the amygdala response is going off and it's lighting up on that brain sort of scan equivalent on the screen. And then they start tapping and the lights just start calming, shutting down. So they can...
Is that solely tapping, or would that be with the linguistic component as well?
That one's solely tapping, because they're in the phobic response. They haven't had a chance to go, even though I hate spiders, they're in it. And so they might be saying to themselves, oh my God, I can't breathe. I'm going to die. I can't. Oh. So we're bringing in whatever the thoughts that we normally try to push away. Oh, let it go. Let it go. I'm safe. It's okay. It's okay. I'm going to let this go. Oh my God, I can't breathe. It's that sort of thing. Let it go. Let it go. So, I mean, for me, with my claustrophobia, I was terribly claustrophobic before I discovered this. And then 2 weeks after discovering it, I was stuck on a train, emergency on coach 3, doors shut, couldn't breathe, cold sweat, thought I was going to die. Really horrible. I don't know if you've ever had panic attacks, but wow. They're not a good thing. So I was on this train, having just learnt this tapping, and I just thought, I don't care what I look like, tapping, and in my head saying, oh my God, I can't breathe. This better work. I don't care what I look like. It's okay. Let it go. Let it go. It's okay. It's okay. Let it go. And I was in my mind just doing that. And in under a minute, less than a minute, something shifted. And now I realize it must have been that amygdala response. And I had a thought I'd never had in my life before, which is, this is what normal people feel like. I didn't like it. It didn't make small spaces my best friend or anything. And the guy next to me, who I'd never met, said, excuse me, but what were you doing? And I just said, it's a miracle. It's a miracle. So if you imagine, my belief was that I was a claustrophobiac.
Yeah.
But the fact was, I just knew how to do it well. You know, it's a skill to know how not to breathe and have cold sweat and everything in a lift or a car wash or a train. So as I was walking away, I was thinking, right, wow. So if the belief is like a tabletop, I had lots of proofs of having claustrophobia in all these different places to hold that tabletop up. I'd just taken one of the legs away. So I thought, well, I'll try this in a car wash. I used to put the thing in, drive in, jump out the car and let the rollers go. That takes some skill too. But this time I thought, okay, Corah, I'm going to do it. And I really was starting to get the phobic response. And I was really regretting this scientific whatever I was trying to do. Started tapping, couldn't breathe. And as I was looking, I thought, bubbles. Wow, bubbles. I'd never even noticed. It's quite beautiful, a car wash, actually. I was starting to see it in a completely different way. So now the thing is, and what I love about EFT is you don't have to keep tapping on the same thing. New neural pathways are formed. So that trigger that lent to an anxiety response would lead to peace. And it's processed. So every time I go into a small room, I do not have to tap. You know, it's every so often another little aspect might come up, and I'll just welcome it away and go, that's another bit to clear out. Mm-hmm. It's a tool in your kit box.
So are you these days when in what you just described there, another thing comes up and you deal with it, are you again customizing the language, if you like, on the fly that you're using during the tapping process to verbally address, obviously, the relevant issue?
That's a good question. And the thing is, it doesn't matter if you know what it is or not. You just need to know how it makes you feel.
Would you get better results if you were to consciously tune in, as it were, onto the issue? Would you be less likely to get a recurrence?
I think that if you can get to that response in the central nervous system, that's the gold. It really is, because that's where that whole phobic or anxiety, that energy that would have gone into fight or flight and stayed as a trauma, mm-hmm. That's, if you can get to that, is great. So the languaging isn't always important at all. And in fact, I do say to clients, I don't need to know what the issue is. You could be a spy and I could still work with you, you know. And sometimes people are so judgmental of themselves, they don't want to tell somebody they've just met. So I don't want that to be a barrier. What goes on in their mental, metaphorical landscape, some of that is none of my business, actually. You know, it's not for me to go into their landscape. I don't even understand their landscape. A watermelon to them might mean very different things to a watermelon to me. They might have been bashed over the head with one, you know. I just like the way it tastes. So I can't assume that their metaphor is the same as mine. And I have to respect people's individual sort of approach to life. Tapping is something that could be a daily thing, you know, just to set you up for the day. There might be things, maybe you've got some sort of low-level worries going on about the day. How am I going to get that done? This, that, the other. And it might just be, just let it go. It's okay. It will be fine. It will all work out. You know, it's just that calming, because that gets us into a resourced state. So from that state, we're much more productive. So yes, tapping can be used for that. My claustrophobia, sometimes if I've been in a theatre or something and I know there are going to be 20 excuse me's if I want to leave, that might get a little low level thing. And then there are tapping points on the fingers that you can do, which relate to, I believe that's the large intestines, lungs, circulation, triple warmer and heart. So you can just sit and do that. Or I've tapped so often I can mentally tap. It's almost like energy flows where attention goes at this subtle level. So I can do that. There are other things I add in, holding the wrist, breathing in, breathing out, and just saying peace, 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 peace in the head and letting that descend like a wave through the body. And that's really lovely to do at the end of a tapping. Some people hold the heart and breathe in and breathe out. It centers and anchors that state. So the unconscious knows if I go like this, it knows what that is, and it likes that state, and it will take me back to it quickly.
So are there any conditions or past traumas that can't be approached or dealt with or treated with EFT in your professional opinion?
I know it sounds weird to say try it on everything, but with the caveat that if people have been severely traumatized, they need to see a skilled practitioner, because it helps no one to go and work directly back at a trauma. So there are lots of techniques that the practitioner will use that will, if you imagine that there might be, if somebody, say, has been attacked or some big horrific event, or learning about the death of someone suddenly or whatever, there'll be precursors. And before going to this, you'd circle around and you'd make sure that that person was resourced. You might work almost using whichever technique, but it's quite sort of hypnotic to inform that self of what's about to happen. So you're sort of playing a little bit with time. So that memory, because memories change every time we remember them, we have different perspectives to them. And beliefs also are not set in stone. They're based on the information at the time. So a trauma, it's almost like an encapsulated belief system. And if you bring new information to it, you can change that belief. So a man who perhaps when he was 4 years old, he remembered his mother always leaving him, walking away, leaving him alone. That 4-year-old would have to make sense of that was happening. And between 0 and 6, we're in a hypnotic state. Children are in theta. Everything comes in as a truth. They don't understand adults have lives. Anything that happens, they believe is the result of what they did or didn't do. So they'd have to make sense of that. And they might think, oh, mum's never here. Mum doesn't love me. I'm unlovable, might be the belief. And that belief goes very unconsciously, like the musical theme of their life. And they have failed relationships. They lose that job. I'm unlovable, playing in the background. But as an adult, they might realize with some awakening moment, do you know what? My mum loved me so much. She worked 4 jobs. Yeah. So that information to that memory completely washes through time.
Again, it seems to make very good sense that in the light of our adult knowledge, we can revisit conclusions and generalizations and premises that we've laid down in our subconscious, as you mentioned with the child perhaps drawing a conclusion, mummy doesn't love me, hastily and inappropriately. We can revisit these and effectively overwrite them, can't we? Which is what really excites me about this sort of technique. With regards to conventional psychotherapy, it has been said that there's often a danger that by talking over a problem or an issue, that you can inadvertently reinforce it rather than deal with it and heal it. Does tapping address that by always using some positive language involved in the process? Are you always, for example, with claustrophobia or scared of spiders or being overweight or whatever the issue is, are you specifically using some language and saying to yourself something that negates the previously held conviction, should we say?
It's really, really important to work with the client's belief system. So my language might not be appropriate to overwrite into their world.
But would it be positive in general around the issue? Would it be to is it? I mean, obviously we've talked about the self-acceptance, but in order to lay should we say the foundations for moving on and a new way of looking at an issue, are you careful to create some kind of phrasing that would positively overlay the issue? Yeah.
What I would do, the timing of that is really important, because I mean, if a glass is full of negativity, you can't pour any amount of positivity into it. You have to sort of make sure that this is drained out. So if the reason I love matrix reimprinting is that you can go back to that echo. You can find out how it was feeling at the time, because it's from the perspective of that child. So the man, if he was triggered, nobody loves me, he'd feel like a 4-year-old again. It would be from that perspective. So you'd go back to that 4-year-old and find out how he was feeling. Then you'd find out what belief did he believe as a result of this situation. Then you could ask them, what would you like to have happen? And then you can imprint a positive as that like to have happen happens. So a typical way of doing that, which I love the way it works because it's so, so powerful, that you can almost have your older self that's gone back to your younger self. And maybe all that younger self wanted was a hug and to be told that it was all okay. Then you might have a third you looking at those two, and you'd notice this wonderful light around them, this love, this inclusivity, this appreciation, this safety. And that light might have a colour. It's different for every client. So I'm just asking the questions. And then they make that colour brighter, brighter, brighter. And then they take a picture, Polaroid photo, and the you in the here and now will take that picture, tap the top of their head once as they pop the picture into their head, and then you'd follow it as that light that contains that state shines and goes into all of the neurons, all of the cells in the body, everything. It imprints. That's why it's called matrix reimprinting. It reimprints a hugely positive way of speaking with the unconscious, because the unconscious doesn't necessarily always go with language. It will go with this sort of metaphor, and light is a very strong metaphor.
I've heard it said that tapping and EFT, emotional freedom technique, can be used in association with things like wealth creation in one's life, or getting more clients. Yes. I mean, as a sort of a empirical evidence and sort of scientific approach kind of guy, I can see how we can deal with things that we've experienced, but sometimes I struggle to see how it can, affect the external facts of reality, such as wealth creation, apart from the things that we can actually do. Have you seen any evidence that it can be used?
Yeah,
for those?
It's an interesting, because otherwise, why hasn't everybody won the lottery that's using EFT sort of thing? So I get that, and I'm still trying. But I sort of call this chasing the monster in a way, because as you're tapping a positive, what's going to happen inside your thoughts? All of the resistance to that thought are going to come out of the dark, shadowy parts of your mind. And they're going, no, you're not. You're never going to be. You don't deserve it. All of those start coming out. So do you see what I mean?
Yeah.
So what you're actually doing is clearing the ones that you weren't even aware you had until you focused on, because you might consciously say, of course I want to win the lottery. Why wouldn't I? Unconsciously, the 95% is saying, no, you don't deserve it. We're meant to be poor. We always struggle for money. Da, 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 da. That's
Sure.
what's going to win.
I can see that the clearing away of blockages and the things like I don't deserve it, obviously these can have a huge bearing on actions taken, and we can subconsciously self-sabotage, of course, any moves towards wealth creation in our lives. I think winning the lottery, I'm not sure of a direct connection there, but that certainly makes sense that we could effectively help get ourselves out of the way, couldn't we, of
exactly. That's
progress.
a great way of saying it, getting ourselves out of the way. And that's the thing, but it's also honouring those fears, because they have come from somewhere. So I think it's really important, because if we don't validate ourselves, if we don't sort of, really understand that life is really a process, it is a journey, we're all a work in process. I say to my clients, I'm not sitting on a mountaintop with all the answers. The difference for me is that I don't sit on things for as long. I used to be the queen of resentment. I didn't forget one slight that was done to me, and I've had lots of things happen in my life. I've had a very rich life, ups, downs, everywhere, and I'm so glad of it. But now if something happens, I honour the feeling. If somebody says something hurtful, it hurts. I'm not going to say that doesn't, it hurts. And then if it sticks around for too long, I think, well, why does it hurt so much? There must be something unresolved in me that it's really activating. So if I was 7 foot tall and you tease me about being short, I'd just look at you like, what are you, but if I was 3 foot tall, I would remember all the times that I've been bullied on the playground and people had been mean to me. I'd have that unresolved stuff. And the tapping can work with that and say, look, you're fine right here, right now. You're fine. There's no one attacking you. So it gives pause. It gives the psyche, the unconscious, whatever, time to go, I can let this go.
You've given us a great picture and insight into the whole practice of EFT, emotional freedom technique. Where can you be contacted, Corah? Where do you practice? And can you give us some details of how potential clients, obviously in the UK, this does go out, around the world, and a lot of listeners in the States. But in the UK, can you tell us where people might be able to find you?
I do a lot of work with students at the moment at universities because I started off being a sort of taking on a role with my private practice of doing that, and I'm doing it increasingly because it's really lovely to see people at that age get this so they can move on. I've done a lot of work in the business world where I've worked with some very cynical businessmen who sit there like, prove it to me. And I love that too, because they become the greatest advocates. So, so in terms of, I haven't got a website that I've redone now, but I have my email address. I welcome emails. I work on Skype a lot. I do have clients in America and France and Austria and all over the place.
Of course, because it doesn't need to be face to face, does it, with this wonderful modern technology?
That's what's so brilliant. I have a client who has agoraphobia. How would she ever have had help? It's such a beautiful modality, and you can tell I really do love it. And I think it's great that you're doing this and at least sending the message out that it's not some weird hocus pocus thing. It's firmly rooted in science. And I think I had one student the other day who said, who just didn't want to go near it, didn't want to do tapping, looks ridiculous. I'm not a salesperson. I don't, fine. That's fine. People want to find me. I'm contact@corah.me. But also I'd encourage people to check out the bodies, the EFT bodies, finding somebody in their local area. But I do welcome emails, and of course I would respond. And if people wanted to work with me, I'd love it. So
and clearly, from what you said, there's a great deal of resources out there for people to access if they are interested in trying out this technology. Of course, it's free, it's easy. I mean, free to
easy to learn.
Yeah, easy to learn. It's free in terms of you could just practice in front of the mirror, can't you? You can just practice. Yeah. And so it's very, very accessible. It's a fantastic tool to try and alleviate some of that suffering, isn't it? So that's marvelous. Well, Corah, thank you so much for taking the time to share your insights of firstly coming at it from the point of view of a psychotherapist, and then into this tapping, or EFT as we call it. It's been a great pleasure to hear your perspective. So thank you very much indeed.
Thank you so much.
I hope you got some value from this discussion about EFT. I've used it myself, as I said, and had great results in helping to reverse my loss of clarity of vision in the near field, and combining it with something called the Bates method, which we'll talk about next episode. But thank you so much for listening, and remember to check the website lawfulrebel.com. There's loads more there on busting myths within our culture and helpful information so that we can all thrive. I do hope you'll join me again for another episode of Living Outside the Matrix. Until then, live the life you love.
Be the change you want to see. Be the change you want to see.